Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I've been delivering packages for almost 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Rural routes, city blocks, sketchy neighborhoods. Nothing really fazed me anymore. But there's one delivery that changed all that. One address that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. It started on a Tuesday morning in late October. My supervisor handed me a delivery request that was different. No street address, just GPS coordinates. The package was going to some cabin 30 miles off Route 47 in rural Colorado. Cash payment had already been arranged, which was unusual, but the money was good. Really good. Enough to make me overlook how strange the whole thing felt. I loaded up my truck and headed out around noon. The first 20 miles were normal. Mountain highway, scattered houses, the usual. But then I had to turn off onto this narrow dirt road that my GPS barely recognized. The further I drove, the more isolated it became. Pine trees pressed in on both sides, creating this tunnel effect that blocked out most of the sunlight. About 15 minutes in, my cell service completely disappeared. The radio started crackling with static, and then that died too. All I could hear was my engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. The air was getting colder, and I noticed fog starting to roll in from the mountains. This is when I should have turned around. But I kept going. The GPS coordinates led me deeper into the woods, up a winding path that was barely wide enough for my truck. Branches scraped against the windows, and I had to go slow to avoid the worst of the potholes. When I finally reached the coordinates, I almost drove right past it. The cabin was set back in the trees, nearly invisible through the fog. It was old, really old. The kind of place that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Multiple "no trespassing" signs were nailed to trees around the property, some of them so faded you could barely read them, but there was smoke coming from the chimney. Thin, gray smoke that disappeared into the fog almost immediately. I parked my truck and grabbed the package. As I walked toward the cabin, every step seemed too loud. The fog muffled everything else, but my footsteps on the dead leaves sounded like gunshots. I could smell the wood smoke, but there was something else mixed in with it. Something wrong, like meat that had been left out too long. The cabin looked even worse up close. Paint peeling off the walls, windows so dirty you couldn't see through them, porch steps that sagged under my weight. But someone was definitely inside. I could see the faint glow of firelight through the cracks around the door. I knocked, 3 solid raps that echoed through the fog. For a moment, nothing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps moving toward the door. It opened just a crack, and I saw a pale face peering out at me. A woman, maybe 40, with stringy blonde hair and eyes that looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. You're the delivery guy," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. Package for this address." She opened the door a little wider, but she kept glancing over my shoulder like she expected someone to come walking out of the fog behind me. "Rebecca," I asked, reading the name on the package. She nodded quickly and reached for it, but as she took it from my hands, she pressed something else into my palm, a folded piece of paper. "He doesn't know you're coming," she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't catch it. Before I could ask what she meant, she stepped back and started to close the door. But then I heard it. Voices from deeper inside the cabin, multiple voices, all talking at once, getting louder. "Rebecca!" "Who is that?" "Rebecca, get back here." Her face went white. She slammed the door shut, and I heard the sound of multiple locks being engaged. I looked down at the piece of paper in my hand. In shaky handwriting it said, "Help me." That's when I noticed the windows. All of them. There were faces pressed against the glass, watching me. I counted at least 4, maybe 5 different people, all staring out at me with these blank, empty expressions. I backed toward my truck, trying not to run. The voices from inside the cabin were getting louder now, and I could hear Rebecca screaming. Not words, just screaming. I reached my truck and turned the key. Nothing. The engine didn't even turn over. I tried again, pumping the gas pedal. Still nothing. The screaming from the cabin stopped abruptly. Everything went quiet except for the wind in the trees and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I tried the engine again, whispering every prayer I could remember. This time it caught. The engine roared to life, and I threw it in reverse without even looking behind me. I backed down that narrow dirt road faster than I should have, branches scraping the hell out of my truck, but I didn't care. When I finally made it back to Route 47, I pulled over and called the police. Told them everything. The cabin, Rebecca, the note, the screaming. They said they'd send someone to check it out. 3 days later, they called me back. They'd used the GPS coordinates I gave them, followed the same dirt road I described. But there was no cabin, no building at all, just empty forest. They searched the entire area. Nothing. I never found out who Rebecca was or what happened to her that day. But I kept that note. It's in my glove compartment right now, and sometimes when I'm driving those mountain routes, I catch myself looking for that dirt road again. I haven't found it yet. And honestly, I hope I never do. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. The second story happened about 6 months later. I was working an emergency overnight shift. One of our regular drivers had called in sick, and they needed someone to cover his late-night deliveries. Easy money, or so I thought. Around 11:47 p.m., I got a rush delivery to an apartment complex in Detroit called Riverside Gardens. The name made it sound nice, but when I pulled up, I realized it was anything but. Half the building looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and graffiti covering most of the walls. The few streetlights that were working flickered like they were about to die. The package was for someone named Marcus Thompson in apartment 4B. Simple enough, except when I got to the building directory, it was completely smashed. Glass everywhere, wires hanging out. I'd have to find the apartment the old-fashioned way. The front door to the building was propped open with a brick. Inside, the lobby smelled like mold and something else. Something sweet and rotten. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for years, so I headed for the stairs. The stairwell was dark. Motion sensor lights were supposed to turn on as I climbed, but they only worked sporadically. I'd take a few steps, and suddenly I'd be flooded with harsh fluorescent light. Then it would click off, and I'd be in darkness again. On the second floor, I started hearing this sound. A rhythmic tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on a table. It seemed to be coming from behind one of the apartment doors, but I couldn't tell which one. Third floor, same thing. The tapping continued, maybe even got a little faster, but now it sounded like it was coming from a different door. When I reached the fourth floor, I found apartment 4B at the end of a long hallway. The tapping sound was everywhere now, like it was coming from inside the walls all around me. But what really got my attention was the door to 4B itself. It was slightly open, just a crack, maybe an inch or two. I knocked on the door frame. "Mr. Thompson, package delivery." No answer, but I could hear a television playing inside, just static like it was tuned to a dead channel. "Mr. Thompson." Still nothing. The tapping in the walls was getting faster now, more insistent. I pushed the door open a little wider and peered inside. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no belongings, nothing except an old TV sitting on the floor in the middle of the room, playing that static. But the delivery order was specific. Marcus Thompson, 4B, Urgent delivery. I called out one more time. Hello? Anyone home? That's when I realized the tapping wasn't random. It was following a pattern, almost like Morse code. And it wasn't just coming from one apartment anymore. It was coming from all of them, all up and down the hallway. I looked around and noticed something that made my blood run cold. All the doors were starting to open. Slowly, just an inch or two, the same way 4B had been when I arrived. But nobody was coming out of them, just darkness beyond each partially opened door. The tapping was getting louder, faster, more frantic, and now I could hear something else. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing coming from inside each of those dark doorways. I dropped the package right there in the hallway and ran for the stairs. Behind me, I heard all those doors slam shut at exactly the same moment, like they were synchronized. I made it to my truck and called my supervisor, told him I couldn't complete the delivery because the recipient wasn't available. I didn't mention the rest of it. Who would believe that? The next morning, I called the building management company to follow up on the delivery. The woman on the phone was confused. 4B, she said. Sir, there is no apartment 4B in Riverside Gardens. Our building only goes up to 4A, and we don't have any tenant named Marcus Thompson. I drove back there the next day in broad daylight. Went up to the 4th floor just to double-check. She was right. The hallway ended at apartment 4A. Where 4B should have been, there was just a blank wall, but I swear I could still hear tapping coming from behind it. The third incident happened on what should have been a routine afternoon delivery. Phoenix suburb, nice neighborhood, expensive package that required a signature. Address was 1247 Maple Street. GPS had no problem finding the area. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. But when I got to Maple Street, 1247 didn't exist. I drove up and down the block 3 times. There was 1245, a nice 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn. And there was 1249, a similar house with a red brick facade. But between them was just an empty lot with overgrown grass and a for sale sign that looked like it had been there for years. I parked and double-checked the address on the package. Definitely 1247 Maple Street. I even walked up to 1245 and asked the elderly man watering his flowers if he knew anything about the house next door. Next door? He said, looking confused. Son, there hasn't been a house on that lot for as long as I can remember. Been trying to sell that land for at least 10 years. I thanked him and walked back to my truck, scratching my head. Maybe there was a mistake with the address. I'd call it in and see if they could contact the customer, but when I looked back at the empty lot, there was a house there. I'm not talking about construction happening quickly or anything like that. I mean, I looked away for maybe 30 seconds, and when I looked back, there was a full Victorian-style house sitting on that lot, like it had always been there. It was completely out of place in the neighborhood. While all the other houses were modern suburban builds, this was old, really old. 3 stories with a wraparound porch and those ornate wooden details you see in historic districts. I should have left right then. But I had a job to do. I grabbed the package and walked up to the front door, my mind trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe I'd been confused about which lot was empty. Maybe the house had been there all along, and I'd just missed it somehow. The closer I got to the house, the more wrong everything felt. The grass was too green, like artificial turf. The windows were spotless, but they seemed to reflect nothing. Not the sky, not the trees, not even me as I walked up the front path. I knocked on the door, and it opened almost immediately, like someone had been waiting right behind it. The woman who answered was probably in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was wearing a blue dress that looked like it belonged in a different decade. Her smile was perfect. Too perfect. "You must be the delivery man," she said in a voice that sounded like she was reading from a script. "Yes, ma'am." package for Sarah Mitchell at 1247 Maple Street. That's me. She reached for the package, and I noticed her movement seemed mechanical, like a wind-up toy. As she signed for the package, I looked around the porch. No mailbox, no house, numbers, no utility connections that I could see. Even the landscaping looked like it had been painted rather than planted. "How long have you lived here?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She tilted her head to one side, and her smile never wavered. "We've always been here, haven't we?" "We?" "I'm sorry, we." But she was already closing the door. "Thank you for the delivery. Have a wonderful day." The door shut with a soft click, and I heard the sound of multiple locks engaging, which was strange because I hadn't seen any locks on the door. I walked back to my truck, but something made me glance back at the house one more time. All the windows on the second and third floors were filled with faces. Men, women, children, all pressed against the glass, all wearing that same perfect smile. I got in my truck and started driving away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. At the next intersection, I pulled over and looked back. The lot was empty again. Just overgrown grass and that old "for sale" sign. I drove back to 1247 Maple Street one more time. Still empty. I got out and walked to where the front door had been. Nothing but weeds and dirt, but I could still smell something in the air. Fresh paint and something else. Something chemical, like formaldehyde. I never reported what happened. How could I? But sometimes, when I'm driving through suburban neighborhoods, I catch myself double-checking addresses, making sure the houses are really there. Because now I know that sometimes they're not. The fourth and final story happened just last month. It's the reason I requested a route change and why I only work daylight hours now. I had a special delivery to a place called Secure Store Self-Storage, about 20 miles outside of Nashville. The package was for someone named Daniel Williams, Unit 47. The instructions were specific. Delivery had to be made before 6 p.m., and I was supposed to use the gate code 4739 to get into the facility. I arrived at 5:30 p.m., cutting it close, but still within the window. The place looked deserted. The office was closed, no other cars in the parking lot, just row after row of storage units stretching back into the property. I punched in the gate code, and it worked. The chain-link gate rolled open with a rusty grinding sound. As I drove through, it closed behind me automatically. The facility was bigger than it looked from the outside. It was laid out like a maze, with narrow corridors between the storage units. Some were small, maybe 5 by 5. Others were large enough to park a car in. All of them had roll-up metal doors secured with padlocks. I followed the unit numbers, looking for 47. The sun was getting low, and the shadows between the storage corridors were getting longer and darker. I had maybe 15 minutes before my deadline. Unit 47 was at the very back of the facility, in a section that felt completely isolated from the entrance. When I found it, the first thing I noticed was that the roll-up door was already open about 2 feet from the bottom. I parked and grabbed the package. "Mr. Williams, delivery for Unit 47. No response, but I could hear something moving around inside the storage unit. Shuffling sounds like boxes being moved. I called out again. "Daniel Williams." "Package delivery." That's when I heard the phone ringing, coming from inside the storage unit. I walked closer to the partially open door and called the number that was on the delivery slip. Sure enough, the ringing got louder. "Hello," I called out. "Mr. Williams?" The phone stopped ringing and I heard a voice from inside the unit. "Just slide it under." The voice was flat, emotionless, and something about it bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. "Sir, I need a signature for this package. Can you come out here for a second?" "Just slide it under." The exact same tone, the exact same inflection, like it was a recording. I crouched down and tried to peer under the gap between the door and the ground. I could see feet, men's work boots, but they weren't moving naturally. They were kind of dragging, shuffling, like the person wearing them was having trouble walking. "Sir, are you okay in there? Just slide it under." Now I was sure it was a recording, but that didn't make sense. Who sets up a recording in a storage unit? I stood up and looked around. The facility was completely quiet, except for the sound of wind moving through the corridors between units. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. From the storage units around me, I started hearing voices. Different voices, but they were all saying the same thing. "Just slide it under. Just slide it under. Just slide it under." It was coming from at least 6 different units, maybe more, all of them with the same flat, recorded tone. I backed toward my truck, and the voices got louder, more insistent. Some of the other storage unit doors were starting to rattle, like something was trying to push them open from the inside. I threw the package down in front of Unit 47 and ran for my truck. As I started the engine, I could hear metal doors slamming open behind me, but I didn't look back. I just drove straight for the exit, taking corners too fast, scraping my truck against the concrete walls of the corridors. When I reached the gate, it was closed. I hit the call button for the office, but nobody answered. The gate wouldn't open. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying different combinations on the keypad before the gate finally rolled open on its own. I called my supervisor as soon as I got home and told him I'd completed the delivery. I didn't mention the rest of it, but the next day I looked up secure store self-storage online. According to every search result I found, the facility had been closed for 3 years, abandoned due to unpaid taxes and code violations. But I have the gate code memorized. 4,739. And sometimes, late at night, I think about driving back there just to see if those voices are still playing. I won't, though. Some doors should stay closed, some deliveries should never be made, and some places should be left alone. Thanks for listening. If you made it through all 4 stories, you're braver than I am. Because even now, months later, I still check my delivery routes twice before I head out. I still avoid addresses that seem too isolated, too quiet, too wrong. I changed my route permanently after these experiences. Now I stick to busy neighborhoods, shopping centers, places with plenty of witnesses and cell phone coverage. But sometimes, when I'm driving through unfamiliar areas, I catch myself looking for those places again. The cabin in the fog, the apartment that shouldn't exist, the house that appears and disappears, the storage facility that's been closed for years. They're out there somewhere, waiting for the next delivery driver who doesn't know any better. I just hope it's not you.